who will be back there at the table, and she will stamp your passport. Thank you all for coming. This is a real joy. You know, it's really wonderful when we have poets here who are just excellent poets, and she is one of them. But it's also great when I can introduce to you a friend. And Jaki Shelton Green has been a friend for at least 20 years. She is the Poet Laureate of North Carolina. She is a writer, a poet, obviously, and a community arts activist. She has 8 books of poetry, including Dead on Arrival and New Poems, Masks, Conjure Blues, and several others. She's also done plays. She's written many articles and poetry selections that have appeared in Obsidian, Essence Magazine, Callaloo, and Black Gold. In 2014, she was inducted into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame, and she was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. There's so many other accolades that I could talk about, but I want to shift. You all know me. I want to talk about the things that make her a person to me. She is a mother. She's a mother of 3 children. And one, Amani, was my daughter's roommate and best friend. Amani passed away in 2009. And it took her years to write about her daughter. But poetry is also healing. And so she used it as a way to heal from such a devastating loss. She is a wife. She is married to the handsome Abdul Latif, who's sitting in the back, and he is right in front of her books. Yes, he's putting a finger in me. Now, this morning, he told me the most fascinating story. And that was that they met on Wednesday. He called her on Thursday. They had a meeting at her house on Friday. And her daughter, Imani, my daughter's best friend and roommate, went to her mother and said, "This is a keeper. This man you have to hold on to." And so the next day, she married. Isn't that a story? And after 20 years, he's still silent. He says he loves driving Miss Jaki. And so they go all over the country, indeed all over the world together. And finally, she is a daughter. She and her husband take care of her 101 years old mother. And she's feisty. And she doesn't understand why Jaki Shelton Green has to secret herself sometimes in her own home because she's writing. I know the writers in the audience understand that, but he's a jewel. So he will sometimes take her mother out to Target, wherever, to get her out of the house so she can write. You know a little bit about this woman. You will learn more about her through her poetry. Would you give a warm JMU welcome, furious flower welcome to Jaki Shelton Green.
Thank you, Joanna, and Furious Flower. And there she is, Lauren, for having me, for extending what I already know is Southern hospitality. So how many folk are not from the South in the room? Well, y'all just arrived, so y'all know what it means to be in the South. And as I travel around the country, I'm always amazed at, like I flew into Chicago one time and I didn't know where to go. I looked at my little paper. It was like building such and such on this campus. And I said, how do I get there? And like, people at the airport were like, we don't know. And I remember I found my way into the city, and I found the university, and I found the building, and I found the place, and there were like 4 people that came to my reading. And then it was over. And I had not had food in like 12 hours. And someone handed me a check and said, thank you for coming. I'm sure you can find a cab back to wherever you're going. So it's always wonderful to, your audience, the reader is never better than the audience. So whatever energies you have out there, however you decide to block the reader, the speaker, or how you decide to receive, has a lot to do with what I do up here. So thank you for, when I walked into the room, I felt your energies, and they said, welcome. So I'm grateful for that. So I want to be all over the place reading. I'm going to read some selections from Breath of the Song, which is one of my books. And then I'm going to actually go from there into a manuscript about Elizabeth Keckley. How many folk know who Elizabeth Keckley is? Just one? Okay. All right. But we will talk about Elizabeth Keckley before I read the poems about Elizabeth Keckley. And then I want to read from a manuscript that's entitled, The Mammy Museum is Closed. The Mammy Museum is closed, and we'll get to her. But I'm going to start with a piece that I read quite often. I do a lot of work with non-traditional writers. I teach documentary poetry at the Duke University Center for Documentary Studies at Duke. But more importantly, I work with disenfranchised writers. I work with writers on the fringe, and I work with people on death row. Voices that are marginalized, voices that have been muted, people who have no agency in the world. This piece is a poem that I wrote when I was working with women on death row, where I was in residence with them for one entire year. I was not doing death row. I mean, I was like the writer in residence there. I better clarify that, because once a reporter reported, and then she was on death row. Well, I wasn't on death row, but I was certainly working with people on death row. I don't know, sometimes every day we're on death row. But I only allowed them to write about their hands. For an entire year, their subject matter was only to write about their hands. I wanted them to think about the power of their hands. I wanted them to think about the acts that had led them to death row. So this is a piece that I wrote as a part of that collection. I know the grandmother one had hands. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always in bowls, folding, pinching, rolling the dough, making the bread. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always underwater, sifting rice, bluing clothes, starching lives. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always in the earth, planting seeds, removing weeds, growing knives, burying sons. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always under the cloth, pushing it along, helping it birth into skirt, dress, curtains to lock out night. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always inside the hair, parting, plaiting, twisting it into rainbows. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always inside pockets, holding the knots, counting the twisted veins, holding on to herself, lest her hands disappear into sky. I know the grandmother one had hands, but they were always inside the clouds, poking holes for the rain to fall. And the second piece, who will be the messenger of this land? Who will be the messenger of this land? Count its veins, speak through the veins, translate the language of water, navigate the hills of lineage. Who will carry this land in parcels, paper, linen, burlap? Who will weep when it bleeds, hardens, forgets to birth itself? Who will be the messenger of this land, wrapping its stories carefully in patois of Creole, Irish, Gullah, Twi, Tuscarora, stripping its trees for tea and pleasure? Who will help this land to remember its birthdays, baptisms, weddings, funerals, its rituals, denials, disappointments, sacrifices? Who will be the messengers of this land, harvesting its truths, bearing unleavened bread, burying mutilated crops beneath its breast? Who will remember to unbury the unborn seeds that arrived in captivity, shackled, folded, bent, layered in its bowels? We are their messengers, with singing hoes and dancing plows, with fingers that snap beans, arms that raise corn, feet that cover the dew falling from okra, beans, tomatoes. We are these messengers, whose ears alone choose which spices, whose eyes alone name basil, nutmeg, fennel, ginger, cardamom, sassafras, whose tongues alone carry hemlock, bloodroot, valerian, damiana, St. John's wort. These roots that contain its pleasures, its languages, its secrets. We are the messengers, new messengers, arriving as mutations of ourselves. We are these messengers, blue breath, red hands, singing a tree into dance. So I know how that passport thing works. So I appreciate y'all showing up. And as usual, audiences tell me what I should be reading. So, I have it all figured out, I have it all planned, and then your energy says, So, this is a poem I never read. That's calling me to read it. Warriors at Play. In the morning paper, your obituary moved my hair, skin, teeth, breast, feet to memory. Colorado snowdrifts, fishing in Oyster Bay, torn sunsets in Montego Bay, conch soup, stew, plantains, macaroni sunflowers, denim fluffed pillows, musk oil, mistaken identities, bombed cars, spilled wine, emergency rooms, hallucinations, paternity blues, singing for elders, burying unborn sons, praying for new shoes, rain, revolution, planting fenna, pennyroyal, mint, chewing licorice, trading masks, speaking in conjured language. The high priestess names her price, 85 American dollar, Johnny Walker Red whiskey, seal intact. I pay for dog divinations. We travel quietly around Pellerino, midnight streets of Bahia. Chained spirits of slaves sniff the dark, hide from a lonesome morning. Search the skirts of Madame Estelle, the goddess of light. What is the price of your medicine? Asked the slave. Where does this river flow? Whose blood will steer this boat? In the church, my hair remembers other funerals, other dances of your death, other masked murderers, other lovers wailing. We are all your widows together. We name snowdrifts, share recipes for grilled salmon, recall barefoot Decembers, picnics in Irish fields, Swiss nightmares, London operas, French pregnancies, Italian abortions. Unnamed widows wear every shade of black, wear every rehearsed smile, wail in rhythm, birth counter-revolutionaries. In Bahia, slave spirits hold your grave ransom. Slave spirits remember other rivers. Slave spirits become the new auctioneers. We dance, a priestess dance, get high on holy water. Sign your death certificate in blood, semen, fire. So, Elizabeth Keckley came to Hillsborough, North Carolina. Hillsborough, North Carolina is the county seat of Orange County, which is 10 miles from my house, where I grew up in Orange County. Elizabeth Keckley came to Hillsborough as the slave of the Presbyterian minister who owned her. He and his family, and in the vernacular of the South that I come from, folk would say they were dirt po. They were so po they didn't have a pot to po piss out of, that kind of po. That's Southern vernacular. This family was so poor that they really could not afford a slave. But Elizabeth Keckley had been gifted to this minister by his brother. So they come to Hillsborough, North Carolina, and Elizabeth Keckley is put out to work. And she works for the Burwell School, it's a historic school for white women during the 1800s. And she works there. She's a cook, she cleans, she does what slave women do for white folk. Elizabeth Keckley was considered an uppity slave. She did not behave well as a slave. And her owner would not punish her, he would not whip her, but he would have the schoolmaster and he would have Mr. Webb, the attorney in town, to whip her. Fast forward 2 years ago, a friend of mine owns a bed and breakfast downtown Hillsborough, North Carolina. And he's invited me to do writing retreats at the bed and breakfast. And every time I go to his house, there is this foul energy coming from the backyard, from beyond the azaleas. And after about 5 visits, I said, David, what's in the backyard? And he said, do you remember Elizabeth Keckley? I said, of course. He said, that's where she was whipped. This is a historic house, still has the marker. It's the Webb house. Now, Elizabeth Keckley made her way to Washington, D.C. and became a dressmaker or a modiste. She became the modiste for Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife. By the time she got to Mrs. Lincoln, she was pretty affluent in Washington, D.C., but she was her mistress. They had a very twisted friendship. They were girlfriends, kinda, sorta, because they were not equal. They were not equal. But she became Mary Todd Lincoln's confidant after the murder of Abraham Lincoln. They traveled together to Europe. At this point, Mary Todd Lincoln has crawled back to wherever she crawled out of before she married Lincoln, and she is very poor. Elizabeth Keckley's station in life has changed. She's of the upper class Black African-American milieu of Washington, D.C. She's one of the founders of Wilberforce University. She went on to help women with sewing degrees and sort of shape the fabric of the upper Black middle class of Washington as freed slaves, as freed people living in Washington. So I tell all of this if you don't know who she is, so you have some sense of this poem that I'm going to read. So I'm reading this poem. If you don't know who Elizabeth Keckley is, this is an amazing, it's the Elizabeth Keckley Reader, and this is the second edition, volume 2. There's volume 1 and 2. There's a lot of historical scholarship on Elizabeth Keckley that you should delve into if you're interested, especially if you are interested in how the slave woman was able to capture the very archetype of European fashion during the 1800s, having never been to Europe when she was doing it. But she knew textiles and she understood the language of fabric. And then I'm going to read some more poems about Elizabeth Keckley, and you need to know a little bit about these poems. A girlfriend of mine who is at Lincoln University in Tennessee has written a manuscript about Mary Todd Lincoln. And we were invited, this is the bicentennial of Elizabeth Keckley in Hillsborough. And the good white people who came together said, we're going to celebrate Elizabeth Keckley. And I thought, and what might we be celebrating? She had a pretty miserable, violent existence in this county. How can you call this a celebration? What are we celebrating? So I got them to change the language, that we would be commemorating Elizabeth Keckley. A part of that commemoration, my dear friend, writer Darnell Arnault, who's a poet, wrote a collection of poems that I responded to in the voice of Elizabeth Keckley. And I will read some of those. So I'm telling you this so it makes a little bit of sense because you don't have Darnell's poems. A Feast of Whispers. Elizabeth Keckley was nobody's backwoods whisper. She knew that even the clothespins, sparrow feathers, blue glass, all whispered in the night, like the spider unlacing a full moon web. She gathered the very bloodline of cotton, damask, silk, linen. She worked inside of the stillness of the night, knowing that this stillness was deeper than death waiting. She becoming more of the notion of free. Each stitch, prick, between torch flight and night's light, knew how to measure a sky of neck, hips, wrist, thighs. Each stitch taught her how to tell rock from bone. Each stitch whispering. Bone hangs close to the needle. Rock pushes, slices, colors pattern, like the soles of her feet, outracing the notion of freedom. The unrecognizable sound of her own voice, crying for the loss of her son's skin, weaves into the dancing sleeve of a white woman on the brink of becoming more of the notion of free, like birds who fight the shadows of their own wings. Soft dawn whispers crown a morning that pushes back the blush of shimmering thread against the paleness of a dancing southern mistress, stupefied elegance, stretched across drowned indigo stamped chemise, soaked in a music that erases the gentility of surrender. Mary Todd Lincoln prayed for rain clouds against a blood-stained horizon that would not bend. Her only salvation in the hands of her modiste, Lizzie, slave, bonded as confidant. Her words carrying empty potions, unrecognizable as the taste of her own bondage. The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. Lizzie offered a prayer for the prayers unanswered, for the torched, scorched, torn, damned soul of her captor. Her womb soothed 1,000 lashes that wounded the sky, the grass, the river, the fire of her breath. As the story unfolds beneath her cloth, she holds the few strands of what remains of another story, hushed, folded, unwritten, like the path from arrival to departure, from him to Bodis. She sews glass buttons in between the hours that grow inside the desert of her unrecognizable heart. Two women hold back sinister nights, drink from the same cup that spills, disintegrating the only blank canvas between them. They reach for the same light. One hand burned, the other holds heat so close it frays the lace, the landscape of her whiteness. So close it becomes airborne divination. Face to face, silhouette to silhouette, they feel each other's breath. But too many years have stripped them bare of any notion of the freedom they stole from each other. They are the reflection of the same offering to a hungry God. Conjuring new skirts for new dances, the prick of the thumb unleashes more than blood-stained seams, unleashes more than the shrouded dance floors of slaves in unmarked cemeteries, more than the unbearable notion of unrecognizable freedom, crawling through the very eye of her needle. Mary Todd wears weary wail, like an undressed sunrise, bulging with veins of poverty, throbbing, beckoning with the unraveling voices of fallen petals. It becomes her wail. She steps out of her skin for an unmeasurable fitting of her soul. One last lift of muted organza that hugs the waist perfect. She becomes her own modiste, dressing for the dance of freedom, dressing for all the denied dances of her mother, dressing for all the denied slaves, whispering from her unrecognizable voice. From a rooftop, she imagined she saw him, but then she never could decipher between bone and stone the smell of her Abe Lincoln, still lingering in the bloody fabric pressed hard against her chest, flooding parched, untamed rivers, weighing more than her drooping breast. Each stitch taught her how to tell. Each stitch taught her how to measure the heaviness of her own war. Each stitch created a forbidden game, a forbidden weapon. She learned to dress and undress the shadows of her own ladies in waiting, the shadows of quivering stardust hanging from shackled branches. Okay, those of you who are totally bored, like totally bored, well, let's see. So what should I do next? So, I think I'm going to still read from Elizabeth Keckley, probably, maybe, or we could go right into the Mammy Museum. Okay, let's keep doing Elizabeth Keckley. So remember, these are poems in response to other poems. What daily things? Oh, Mary, dear noble woman, I've seen devils unleashed. When I was about 7 years old, I witnessed for the first time the sale of a human being. We were living at Prince Edward in Virginia, and Master had just purchased his hogs for the winter, for which he was unable to pay in full. To escape from his embarrassment, it was necessary to sell one of his slaves. Little Joe, the son of the cook, was selected as the victim. His mother was ordered to dress him up in his Sunday clothes and sent him to the house. He came in with a bright face, was placed in the scales, and was sold, like the hogs, at so much per pound. His mother was kept in ignorance of the transaction, but her suspicions were aroused. When her son started for Petersburg in the wagon, the truth began to dawn upon her mind, and she pleaded piteously that her boy should not be taken from her. But Master quieted her, telling her that he was simply going to town with the wagon and would be back in the morning. Morning came, but little Joe did not return to his mother. Morning after morning passed, and the mother went down to the grave without ever seeing her child again. One day she was whipped for grieving for her lost boy. Colonel Burwell never liked to see one of his slaves wear a sorrowful face, and those who offended in this particular way were always punished. Oh, Mary, dear noble mothers, I've seen such polite devils. Your dusty little heads are all accounted for. No need to count their shadows at play. Only God would find them irresistible enough to eat. Saintly wolf. Sunday mornings are meant for Sunday things. Sunday clothes are meant for Sunday things. Prayers and hymnals dance above the heads of your young cubs. A ride to town in the wagon means a warm bed hours later. A ride to town in the wagon means sweet dreams of licorice and clove-studded oranges. A ride to town is just a ride to town, protected, adored. Oh, Mary, dear noble sister, I've known mothers like you, dark, straight, fierce, with mama storm like you. But not enough storm for the devils that steal their babies. Not enough storm to chase away poisonous white man fever. Not enough storm to locate and bury their tiny bones. Not enough storm for the whip that counts her tears. And then I'll read just one more from this collection. Maiden. During your reign of sanctioned white protected maidenhood, before your life with Lincoln, I was learning to dance with the lust of an overindulged whip. 14 years old, property of my master's eldest son, a man too poor to afford me. My glistening skin, sealed, signed, delivered, the perfect loan. 18, I am strong, fair-skinned for one of my race, becoming more of who I am meant to be, ruler of the integrity of hemlines, bust lines, nips, and tucks. Whipped for my audacity to speak inside my own definition of humanity. Instruments of torture upon my nakedness, wielded by the hands of the Hillsborough schoolmaster. No, Mr. Bingham, I shall not take down my dress before you. Moreover, you shall not whip me unless you prove the stronger. Nobody has a right to whip me but my own master, and nobody shall do it if I can prevent it. During your courtship with French, a house full of constipated ancestors, and the sacraments of all things virginal, my woman-child body was being embroidered with angry rawhide, lash by lash, dancing like needles in Bingham's hands, because I refused to have sex with him. The rawhide pierced me, cut the skin, my quivering skin. My words, small words, so small they would have crumbled inside your porcelain pots of tea. But my one word, no, was an invitation to dance with the whip. Did they ever tell you how much the color of your skin weighed? How much it cost? Did they ever tell you how they measure your maidenhood? Is it the size of peach kernels, a sow's ear, a bushel of pecans, a mess of greens before frost, or the weight of snow atop a wagon wheel? Social graces spun cotton, the beguiling soft tongue of eligibility. Ugly ducklings dressed for market. They told me, I am worth no more than the spiraling moment of one eyebrow raised too high, a perfect set of lips too perfect, a quick slap to dull my sharp quill of a tongue, a rape to mute my dreams. So I think I'm going to start with a piece that I wrote the night that Silent Sam was toppled at UNC campus. And I sat in my bedroom facing the TV between hysterical crying. I had this immense sadness and was very conflicted about what I was feeling. I have a lot of conflicts about, first of all, I hate monuments. If they put up a monument of my mother, I would hate it. I hate monuments. I hate things. I hate these inanimate objects that are supposed to mean something. So, as usual, a poem crept into the landscape of all of my hysteria. I was like in between rejoicing and mourning and not quite knowing what I was mourning. And there was a lot of fear. So as a black woman in the South, to show up and to actually utter, I refer to myself as the other daughter of the Confederacy. And I've been trying to figure out how to get the girls to let me in. My white girlfriends and I've kind of concocted we got a plan. So if y'all see me arrested somewhere, we got a plan. Like how I'm gonna be one of the other daughters of the Confederacy. Yeah. Because I got some of that blood too. Got a lot of Irish shit running through me. So, letter from the other daughter of the Confederacy. The last time I read this poem, I was in the Capitol building of North Carolina, and there's a rotunda. And the day I showed up for this reading, it was the African American read-in at the Capitol building in February. And outside, the building was surrounded by Confederate people and Make America Great Again hats and a lot of Confederate flags. So I'm in the building, and I've read a couple of poems, and I've just announced this is the poem I'm reading, and I look up, and they're all of these Confederate dudes looking down at me. And I'm like, oh, okay, hi. And I'm fearful, and then I think, okay, they have children with them, so they're not gonna get too crazy. And I remember they had to come through security, But it was very interesting to start reading this poem. And they were hanging on to every word until finally one of the women just like pushed everybody out of the room. Letter from the other daughter of the Confederacy. Could would I, have been your black Confederate princess, emblem of truly a new dirty South, a new rag for all the wiping, swiping of blood-dazzled sidewalks, trees bent heavy, heaving beneath black claws, tigers and bears. Could would I, have been your black Confederate concubine, sashaying a room draped in rope, teeth, dried phalanges, pulsating throats, electric-shocked eye sockets. Could would I, have been your black Confederate dominatrix, razor blades strapped beneath my armpits, whips growing like hair across your ribs, your mother's mother's mother raising out of a hell box to claim her name, the last of a savage cave tribe buried alive beneath a southern mansion crest. Your father's father's father does not wince in his grave. He's known other black Confederate dominatrix, claimed flag poles to pleasure her demands, swallowed birth certificates, census reports, Bibles to pleasure his own demands. Could would I, have been your black Confederate trophy, hidden inside mahogany carved beds, hidden inside crystal flutes, hidden inside a meadow of thistle, hidden inside the elbow of an oak that knows everything, everyone, or inside an owl's nest, just a throw from the slave auctioneer's voice. Could would I, have been your black Confederate lover? Bite me, bite me, bite me! While an entire continent roars back upon your back. Our daughters are not your daughters. Our daughters are not your daughters. Our daughters are not your daughters. Let them be. Could would I, have been your black Confederate secret? I am the names of smothered babies in the hands of mammies so black they startle the night they steal from. I am the names of all the daughters grinding and sifting gree-gree into your soup. I am the name of every womb you poisoned. I am the name of all your weariness, all your fear, all your disease, all the death I hold back from you. I am the life of the 100,000 nightmares that hold you hostage to sunlight. Could would I, have been your black Confederate truth, once upon a black Confederate lynching book. I am all the names of all the names of all the names of black skin becoming stardust, floating black snow, falling all over the porcelain nakedness of your white Confederate mistress. Confederate black snow, falling on the tongues of your white Confederate children. Black Confederate skin, tucked inside their pockets for good luck. I am the name of the belt you tighten around your white Confederate waist, woven from my black Confederate skin. Could would I, have been your black Confederate anthem, a princess without a country, the other daughter of the Confederacy, sewing bullets inside Bible pages, wrapping swords with crushed red velvet, dancing knives beneath war skirts. I am this other daughter of your Confederacy, standing bone to bone to bone to bone to all the other Confederate daughters, eating the stars falling from your eyes that could not, would not bear witness to your other daughter of your Confederacy. I am that daughter, bleached bones, rotating eye sockets, searching upside down for stolen birthrights, shackled starlight, and the indescribable taste for freedom. in the same series, yeah, I am the poet laureate of North Carolina. Yeah, I do write poems like this. And no, I don't get in trouble. Because it's time. And I'm receiving a lot of awards that were started or given in the name of Confederates. I'm getting an award in a couple of weeks. And when I Googled, when I did the research, very prominent, one of the founders of the North Carolina early chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. It's in her name. And then I received an award months ago called the R. Parker Hunt Award. And R. Hunt Parker was a judge in North Carolina who fought very righteously against desegregation, against education of freed people. And when Julius Chambers, Dr. Julius Chambers, went into his courtroom back in the 70s and started to plead his case, this judge got up and walked out on this black attorney. So I'm like, why am I getting these awards? But when I went to get the award, which is given by the North Carolina Historical and Literature Association, I'd done my homework. And my acceptance speech, the first lines were, if R. Hunt Parker were walking out of the room today, it would be because he now understands that it is time, that he'd be walking out to make space at the table, that he would not be walking out on anybody, but he would be walking out to make room for all the people that have come behind him. So I stand for these possibilities. Yeah. Another series from the Mammy Museum is closed. Let me go back. So some of the imagery in Letter from the Daughter of the Confederacy comes from my work as a documentary poet and research and understanding that many body parts were kept as souvenirs after lynchings. And one of my students, we do a class called What We Keep Keeps Us. And we talk about the biology of languages, what remains, the physicality, the presence of absence, these things that remain as heirlooms. And one of my students told me that, so we went around the room, and the thing that, he says, well, I don't keep this, but I need to talk about this because I don't know how to talk about this. He said, my family keeps a purse that is made from human flesh. And he said, it's been passed down through generations since the early 1800s. And he said, I am in line for the purse. And he said, I don't want it. He said, I don't want it. And it became a class project. We were all trying to help him figure out what to do with the purse. I said, well, accept it and we'll give it a proper burial. And he said, no, my family would disinherit me. He said, I can't do that. And we never did figure out what he should do. But he said, I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't want it. So you think about the things that we keep. So this poem was very easy when I started thinking about that belt made out of human flesh, the skin of black people tucked inside of the pockets of little white children as souvenirs. If you have ever seen Without Sanctuary, which is a collection of lynching in America, and if you've been to the museum in Alabama, then you will see scenes of lynchings that look like backyard barbecues where people are enjoying hot dogs, frankfurters, Coca-Colas, you know, and getting their souvenirs. So as a documentary poet, it is very easy for me to reach back into these containers of what we keep as a society. What we keep. You don't know what's in your neighbor's house. You really don't. You don't know what's in, I don't know what's in my genealogy. You don't really know what's in yours. But when we dig, we find these things. And for me, writing has become a very valuable container for the keeping. You know, art becomes that container because these are not things that we want to talk about every day, right? They're not things that we need or want in our consciousness as we're trying to just do life. But where are the containers that we build? So for me, that container is poetry. Series from the Mammy Museum is closed. She was forever channeling her mad woman in the attic alter ego. These days, new southern damsels secretly wish they could still be the reason of my distress, as their mothers' mothers worry the water of other mothers' mothers, who stand vigil at crossroads, thresholds, borders, like a lost cavalry without country. I be a black princess, the one that drags you through the sleep that you think to be that fourth martini you needed, before you could glide out of your seat and smile the American smile. The smile, the one daddy with the pedigreed stable paid for. The one smile another mother's mother stitched across her dead daughter's forehead. The smile that snatches the hands of any other white hand when I lean too close. The smile that erases my smile and swallows a whole room of dead patrimony. It is all you can do. Smile, because your antique swords no longer cut. Your puke-stained flag is shredding all over your sun-bleached Constitution. Smile. Gin and tonic, gin and vodka in pretty little cups is still gin and vodka, carrying you up and down the haunted stairwells, while rage persists inside your breast. Black hands in your dreams bring your mail, freshen your coffee, cut your grass, start your gowns, love your children, carry your drunk skeleton from bed to bed. Your antiquated flag is the only skirt that still fits, so you zip it over the festering skin that carries a fever that boils the skin of birds who fly too close to your steaming, wretched hair. The mad woman in the attic is truly mad at you now. No more secrets for you. No more Venetian lace. No more pot de soie slippers. No more Limoges. No more buttery croissants with lemon curd. It's all going downhill from here. A museum of interchangeable smiles that mask Spanish braided leather straps that force please, but you forget the password that unlocks your thighs. Midnight passenger on a bombed out tanker ship, headed out to find daddy's ocean liner. You bomb, murder, eat your own, but always smiling, always smiling, always smiling. Step away from the doorstep. Step away from the door. This is not a dream. You are not your mother's mother. You do not choose the dreams I stroll into. Kneel, fetch, roll over, good girl. Now smile for daddy. Daddy's gonna make it all right. Daddy's gonna make it all right again in your dreams. How are we for time?
We're at 5.
Oh, we're 5. Are we done?
We probably should stop in a few minutes, but you have done such a wonderful job explicating your poems. We should take one more poem, and then we'll be finished.
Or should we just do Q&A?
Okay, all right.
Should we just do Q&A?
Okay, that'll be fine. Want to do? Okay, let's do the Q&A then. All right.
So thank you.
so you
Sure.
can walk with it.
Okay.
Okay. She's gonna walk with this. Come. Because I wanted to get you from behind that podium so they can see how beautiful you are.
Questions?
I know it'll take a moment for you to think of a question, but so I'm going to ad lib for 30 more seconds.
Or not?
No, they'll think of a question. I want to, while they're thinking of a question, thank Dr. Kathy Schwartz for allowing us in this wonderful space.
Thank you.
Of art history, and design. And I was coming to that. And the wonderful curator of Duke Hall Gallery of Fine Art, John Ross. Thank you.
Thank you.
And certainly, I hope some of you get the opportunity to see Colonial Wounds, Post-Colonial Repair, which is the exhibit that's there. All right, we have a question or comment? Yes.
How important is the accessibility of what? Oh, of reading? How important is it to read your poetry?
Or yours. So I guess in interpreting your words, how important is it for the reader to have that background knowledge versus kind of dissecting it and taking care of that?
So, thank you. I like that question. So, there's this part of my brain that says when I write poetry and I put it out into the world, I am not there to do the backstory, you know? And it's fascinating to me what people make of it for themselves and what they bring. When I'm standing in front of you reading it, and if there's historical context or cultural reference that I might boldly make some assumptions that everybody in the room might not get, especially, you know, I sometimes I use a lot of Southern jargon or dialect or things that are just uniquely Southern or a saying that unless you're from the South, you may like, what does that mean? You may totally miss it. But I've talked about this a little today. When I'm writing poetry, if I write a poem, and if the only people in the room who get it are Black women, then I feel like I've totally missed a boat. If I write a poem and the only people who get it in the room are Southerners, I don't feel like I've succeeded. If I write a poem and the only people who get it are short girls with curly hair, then I still feel like I've totally not succeeded. So when I'm writing a poem, I'm thinking about what is the bridge, what is the functionality, where is the archetype for a bridge where we can stand on in all of our otherness and all of our difference, and there's that hook into your humanity. What is the humanness? So when I'm reading some of my grandmother poems and like 99-year-old white dudes in my neighborhood are chasing me across grocery store aisles to tell me, I just love your grandma poems, that means something. It means something because that 90-some-year-old white man coming across that grocery store is like a comet coming across the sky to get to me. Because my mom's 101. They were not buddies. They were not classmates. They were not colleagues. They were not professional associates. If he knew my mother at all, it would have been in a place of servitude, where she was in servitude. So that's what poetry means to me, the usefulness, the utilitarian, the functionality. I want the commonality, the day-to-day. How does this poem function for you? You know, people call me and say, you know, I read your such and such poem today. It was 2 days after my granddaughter died. And it was the book you wrote about your daughter, and it really resonated. So there was a purpose for that book, right? That it's a container for somebody's grief or somebody's pain. Or, oh, I read Dead on Arrival after my divorce. I was like, yeah, I was an angry Black woman back then. Yeah, they were like some angry, pissed off, man done me wrong poetry that a lot of man done me wrong women could relate to. What is the functionality? How am I What's the usefulness of that poem? So I think it works both ways. You know, yes, you need to know some context, but then I tell people, look it up. You know, my students like, where did you look it up? Like, don't ask me, you got Google? Then come back to me. I hope that answers.
That's a great question. Jessica.
You have some recurring images that I just picked up like throughout your whole reading, like burials in the sky and bones, and those are my favorite too, sky and bones, just personally. But I guess I was asking when and like why do you find yourself coming back to certain images?
Because I think they resonate with certain icons of the South. And a lot of times, even if it's an abstract, free verse kind of poem, there's a lot of Southern imagery. There's a lot of imagery that's just in my DNA. When I think about, you know, bones at the bottom of the Atlantic, and like, you know, walking across this campus in Virginia, I kept saying, so what's under these buildings? Like, what was here before y'all showed up? What was here before James Madison showed up? And when I go into spaces, I'm always remembering to, even if I don't say it out loud, to pay homage to those natives who were there, their bones still running through. You know, like what happened in all of these spaces that we inhabit on a daily basis. These portals we cross daily, and we don't think about certain trees, ancient trees, that we walk under as Southerners, or people in Southern landscapes. And if you're like very, very open, sometimes they will tell you what happened here. So, thanks. Any other questions?
Yes, another question.
Well, thank you all for coming, for having me. It's been very pleasurable. Not to cut off any questions, because now you're going to go buy my books, right?
Yes, yes. There are books available. You can meet the wonderful Abdul Latif back there if you buy a book. So let's give Jaki Shelton. Thank you.